You know, every so often you come across something that everybody knows about, but nobody really talks about it. I'd be shocked if there was a single person born today that wasn't born into an uncontacted Amazonian tribe or on Sentinel Island that doesn't know what a dragon is. And even people born into uncontacted tribes may have their own version of the dragon, and I'll get to why that is in just a moment. Long before medieval Europe, long before the fantasy genre, long before any of us were even a distant thought, the ancient Sumerians were carving serpent dragons onto their temples. The ancient Egyptians were performing daily religious rituals specifically to prevent a colossal serpent from swallowing the sun. The ancient Chinese were weaving dragons into every fabric of imperial law. And on the other side of the planet, in a civilization that had absolutely zero contact with any of the old world cultures, ancient Americans built entire pyramids in honor of a feathered serpent god who created the human race. And I've always found it so intriguing that the dragon is such a particular creature. If they didn't actually exist, then they had to be imagined. Are all of these ancient cultures just imagining the same or very, very similar creatures? Possibly, but I also think it's more than that. The dragon is one of history's most overlooked mysteries and interesting phenomena. My name's Luke Caverns, I'm an American explorer and an anthropologist, and this is Ancient Dragons. Alright, let's start with why this is actually strange. Because I think that most people may hear that dragons appear in multiple different ancient cultures and just assume that they must all be connected to each other, as if the cultures are speaking to each other and sharing cultural and mythological ideas with one another. Trade routes, shared mythology, you get the idea. But here's the thing, many of the civilizations we're talking about were not in contact with each other at all. The ancient Chinese were separated from ancient Mesopotamia by thousands of miles of steppe, desert, and mountain range. The Aztecs were separated from everyone in the old world by two enormous oceans and thousands of years. Aboriginal Australians had been essentially isolated from the rest of the world for tens of thousands of years, and yet when archaeologists began piecing together the religious beliefs and artwork of cultures all across the ancient world, from the deserts of Egypt to the jungles of Mexico to the wilds of Scandinavia, they kept finding the same thing. A giant serpent-like creature associated with water, associated with storms, with creation, with chaos, with the raw, untamed power of the natural world, and sometimes even the wisdom of the cosmological, spiritual, and esoteric world. The dragon was never just a snake or a big lizard. It's a creature that seems to sometimes combine the features of powerful animals of the ancient world that people had feared. The serpent, the birds of prey, lions, the bull, sometimes all being fused into a single being of impossible and supernatural power. This is one of the greatest, most prevailing, and unsolved mysteries of the archaeological record. And today, we're going to go through these dragons civilization by civilization, and maybe we'll get an idea of what could actually be going on here. Let's begin where writing itself started, in ancient Mesopotamia, the region we now call Iraq. This was one of the world's first two literate civilizations, and they left us some of the oldest dragon myths ever written. The Sumerians wrote of a creature called the Usumgal, a colossal serpentine monster whose very name was used in royal poetry to describe the greatness of kings. If you wanted to say a king was the most powerful being in the world, you compared him to the Usumgal. That's how central this creature was to their very understanding of power itself. But the most important dragon in Mesopotamian mythology is Tiamat. Tiamat was the primordial goddess of chaos, depicted as an enormous sea dragon who existed before the world itself was formed. She wasn't just a monster, she was everything. The undivided, formless potential of existence before creation had organized it into something recognizable. The god Marduk killed her in battle, and from her body, her very flesh and her bones, he reconstructed into the sky and the earth. And you're going to see here that this is a pretty common thing among dragons, having the ability to traverse the earth being the mid-realm, the sky being the upper realm, but there's even an element here that I think has to do with the underworld or the lower realm, but we'll get to that in just a moment. So think about what that means in terms of ancient Mesopotamia. The world you're standing on right now, according to the ancient Babylonians, is the corpse of a dragon. which is actually very similar to a lot of ancient Americans that thought that the earth itself was the back of a crocodile or the back of a turtle. Very, very similar ideas here. And carved onto the walls of Babylon's most sacred city gate, the Ishtar Gate, built around 575 BC, is another creature called the Mushusu. The Mushusu is a four-legged serpent with the scales of a snake, the talons of a bird of prey, the horns of a viper, and a long darting tongue. This was the guardian of Marduk, king of the gods. 7 bronze Mushusu were said to guard the gate itself, described as creatures that spatter enemy and foe with deadly venom. This wasn't just decoration, this was their very theology, and the way that they viewed not only the natural world and the physical world, but the spiritual, esoteric, cosmological world as well. And I know that that sounds like word spaghetti, word vomit being thrown at you, a lot of different ways to describe how ancient people saw the world, but those are terms that you have to use to just kind of begin scratching at the surface of how ancient people saw their world and saw their reality, with it being so intrinsically different from us. Okay, let's be honest. The cost of living isn't just high, it's exhausting. If you've been leaning on credit cards lately just to cover basic costs like groceries, gas, and utility bills, you're essentially paying a survival tax of 20% interest or more. Why keep handing your hard-earned paychecks to the bank when you could be keeping it for your family? My friends at American Financing have a better way. They're helping homeowners tap into their equity to pay off high-interest debt, with mortgage rates currently in the 5s. And on average, American Financing is saving their customers $800 a month. That's nearly $10,000 a year right back in your pocket. So it's not just a loan, it's a total financial reset. It takes just 10 minutes to find out what you could save. There are no upfront fees and no obligation to talk to a salary-based mortgage consultant. And here's the kicker. Start today and you could even delay 2 mortgage payments. American Financing, America's home for home loans. 866-889-5022. That's 866-889-5022 or americanfinancing.net/Luke. Thank you to American Financing for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to the show. Now, moving into Egypt, we find one of the most psychologically vivid dragon myths ever recorded. Every single night, without exception, the sun god Ra sailed a divine barge through the underworld to reach the dawn on the other side. And every single night, waiting in those dark waters, was Apep, also known as Apophis. A serpent so enormous that the ancient texts describe its height as equal to 8 men standing on each other's shoulders. Its roar could cause earthquakes. When it managed to coil itself around Ra's barge, which it occasionally did according to the mythology, the result was a solar eclipse. And some ancient Egyptian priests performed daily rituals every single morning specifically to ensure that Apep had been defeated and that Ra would rise again the next day. Because for the ancient Egyptians, every sunrise was not something you could take for granted. Every sunrise was a victory over the dragon, proof that chaos had been held back for just one more day. We also know that in Ethiopia, the serpent king Arwe, a dragon who ruled as a tyrant for 400 years demanding human sacrifice, was the monster that had to be destroyed before the Solomonic dynasty, the royal line of Ethiopia, could even begin. The dragon wasn't just mythology. The dragon was the chaos that had to be conquered before civilization was even possible. And as we're going to see here over and over again, the dragon is an amalgamation of different elements of this culture's identity, but the dragon is many times often placed before the founding of the civilization itself. Traveling east into ancient India, the Vedic texts, some of the oldest religious literature ever written, composed more than 3,000 years ago, tell of a dragon named Vrtra who was holding all of the world's water inside his body. He had swallowed the rivers, he had hidden the sun, crops were failing, cattle were dying, drought was spreading across the earth. The king of the gods, Idra, went to war against Vrtra in a battle of cosmic proportions. And when he finally struck Vrtra down, the waters of the world poured free, the rains returned, and life on earth was renewed. Vrtra is often depicted as a 3-headed dragon, and if you compare his story to Tiamat in Mesopotamia, a chaos-ridden dragon whose defeat literally creates conditions for life on Earth or life of this specific civilization, the parallels are pretty striking. 2 civilizations separated by thousands of miles and centuries, but nearly the same story. Across South and Southeast Asia, the Naga dominated religious thought for millennia, great serpent beings associated with water, fertility, and royal power. The Khmer Empire, the civilization that built Angkor Wat, one of the largest religious monuments ever constructed, lined the causeways of their sacred cities with the stone Naga balustrades. The royal family of Cambodia claimed descent from a Naga princess. In Buddhist and Hindu traditions, Naga appear as guardians of temples, sacred springs, and hidden knowledge. And to this day, their snake-like undulating stone forms line the staircases of temples across Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos. And being at Angkor Wat about a year ago today and seeing these serpents lining all of these sites and noticing that they're very similar to these large dragons was one of the things that has got me thinking over the last year that I really need to read more about dragons in the ancient world and kind of putting some of these pieces together, at least to get an idea of what is going on in the mindset of ancient people. Where exactly does the idea of a dragon come from? If they didn't exist in the actual physical world, then that means that they exist in the metaphysical world. It's something that human beings are coming up with or maybe seeing in some different kind of dimension, but it's always an amalgamation of their cultural cornerstones. And then there is, of course, China. The Chinese dragon, the Long, is perhaps the most important political and religious symbol in the history of the ancient world's most populous civilization. For over 2,000 years, only the Emperor of China was permitted to wear the image of the dragon on himself. The Han Dynasty, which ruled China for over 400 years, adopted the dragon as the official symbol of imperial power. Emperors didn't just use the dragon as a logo, they claimed to be the earthly incarnation of the dragon itself. And if you haven't done any looking into ancient China before the arrival of Buddhism, you're missing out. You need to. It is by far one of the world's coolest ancient civilizations. The Long itself is described in remarkable detail in ancient texts. The head of a camel, the horns of a stag, ears of an ox, the body of a serpent, the scales of a fish, the claws of an eagle, the paws of a tiger. It controls rain, it governs rivers, it can shrink itself to the size of a silkworm or expand to fill the entire sky above ancient China. And crucially, the dragon is not evil. It is not a monster to be slain by man. It was philosophical, esoteric, and spiritual cosmic wisdom made into a physical form. And that distinction is extremely important because that is where fantasy sort of separates itself from the reality of the ancient world. Because in fantasy, we always see the dragon as something that is kind of holding this treasure, right? It's holding something valuable, and a human or sometimes a hobbit needs to go into the dragon's lair and slay the dragon. But in ancient times, the dragon isn't something that needs to be slayed. The dragon is the physical amalgamation of all of the most sacred and perfect things in the ancient world. Even meant to be a symbol that's worn on you to signify that you are the physical incarnation of a supernatural being that is the dragon. So it's a very interesting distinction here and a huge separation between real dragons in the ancient world and the fantasy dragons that are just monsters that have to be slayed. In China and across East Asia, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, the dragon was revered in ancient times. It is the very bringer of life itself. But in nearly every Western tradition, the dragon is the enemy, something that must be destroyed. In Japan, the 8-headed serpent Yamada no Orochi was so vast that its body spanned 8 valleys and 8 hills, and hidden inside one of its tails was the sacred sword of Kusanagi, one of the 3 imperial treasures of Japan, which is still revered today. In the Philippines, the sea dragon Bukanawa had a mouth the size of a lake and swallowed 6 of the original 7 moons from the sky. Which is very interesting because why did these people see 7 moons in the sky at one period of time? What exactly does that mean? With the 1 moon remaining is the one that we all see in the night sky. Now, crossing to the other side of the planet, coming back to the Americas, to a civilization that had absolutely no knowledge of Babylon, Egypt, China, or India, the ancient Mesoamericans, who built one of the most elaborate dragon cults in human history, sometimes being more famous than ancient China itself. The Aztecs worshipped Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, a deity who combined the rattlesnake and the quetzal bird into a single being that governed wind, rain, and the morning star. He descended into the underworld and returned. He created humanity. He was the god of knowledge and civilization itself. And even though we don't know what the Teotihuacanos called Quetzalcoatl, the Teotihuacanos, who are potentially a much greater civilization than the Aztecs that lived some 1,000 years earlier, also worship this feathered serpent dragon being. And in the late Classic period, sometime after 900 AD, the Maya also established their own dragon cult. They built the pyramid at Chichen Itza with such precise astronomical engineering that at the spring equinox, the shadows cast by the setting sun create the illusion of a giant serpent slowly undulating down the side of the staircase. And no matter what anyone tells you, that was not by accident. And even up north, among the mound builders of North America, we also find depictions of this feathered serpent dragon being venerated. The existence of the dragon across the ancient world goes on and on. In Norse mythology, two dragons define the shape of existence itself. In their mythology, the dragon's eating away at the fabric of reality itself in the same way that a black hole eats away at a galaxy from its heart, the force that will one day bring the cosmos itself to an end. They also have a world serpent, which is so enormous that it encircles the entire earth, biting its own tail, which is something that is seen all throughout the ancient world. The serpent that is undulating down the steps of the pyramid at Chichen Itza has a rattle in its mouth. As it goes down those steps, it bites on its tail and starts the cycle again. Everything about these dragons is this cycle of the underworld, the midworld, the upper world, the midworld, the underworld, and back again. And that's what I actually think is at the core of these ancient dragon stories. The dragon in Norse mythology isn't just a creature, it is the symbol of reality itself and the cycle of reality. And one of the most overlooked cases of all, in Aboriginal Australia, the rainbow serpent has been central to religious life for at least 6,000 years, making it one of the oldest continually worshipped beings on Earth. Each language group across an entire continent has their own name for it, but the same creature appears everywhere, a vast iridescent serpent associated with water, creation, and the power to give or take life away. The cult of this serpent predates the pyramids of Egypt, predates Stonehenge, and predates writing itself. Before all of that, before civilization ever existed on the planet, the dragon was already there. So before I share with you a few theories that have been posed by archaeologists of why this phenomena seems to appear in so many places across the ancient world, I just have to tell you flat out that nobody actually knows. And I don't know if there is anybody out there who has actually committed their life to studying the phenomena of dragons in the ancient world. But this is one of the most prevailing archaeological mysteries of all time. That said, I do think that there are some theories and explanations that I can see beginning to scratch at the surface and beginning to understand what the dragon could be. The first theory is what scholars call the fossil hypothesis, and this is probably something that you've maybe never considered before. This is perhaps the most tangible archaeological argument. Paleontologists spent several years documenting where ancient dragon legends and fossils overlap, and the evidence is genuinely striking. Ancient Chinese quote-unquote dragon bone sites where fossilized remains were harvested and sold as medicine for centuries correspond almost perfectly with deposits of dinosaur bones. In the deserts of Central Asia, along the trade routes connecting the Mediterranean world to China, there are rich deposits of Protoceratops fossils, four-legged beaked reptiles when their skulls erode naturally from sandstone cliffs look startlingly like a creature with enormous wings and a massive beak. And we know from archaeological evidence that ancient people were finding these bones, and they were probably trying to make some sense of them without the modern framework of paleontology. But that would still mean that all of these ancient cultures from all around the world were finding ancient fossils, assembling them, and then recreating roughly similar creatures that look like dragons, which seems like taking one sort of far-fetched idea and then replacing it with another far-fetched idea. It's not a bad explanation, but it causes more questions than it does answers. Now, the second answer is a bit simpler and maybe much more compelling. Maybe these dragons were real animals, but not real in the way that you think I'm implying. A 20-foot saltwater crocodile seen for the first time by someone who had only heard about it secondhand may be indistinguishable from a dragon. The reticulated python of Southeast Asia can exceed 7 meters in length and swallows its prey whole. Giant monitor lizards, giant constrictors, enormous Nile crocodiles. These animals existed in the ancient world, and ancient people were very exposed to them. And it's possible that in the retelling and across generations of oral tradition, the scales and the monstrous size of these creatures multiplied. But there's also a third theory that actually goes into our biology. Evolutionary biologists have proposed that human beings are just neurologically hardwired to detect and fear serpent-like creatures. Our primate ancestors lived alongside serpents as one of the most consistent and lethal predators for millions of years. Perhaps the result is that the human brain itself has dedicated circuitry that's designed specifically to detect serpents. This could be something that is wired into many different mammal species. If that's true, then the dragon may not be a cultural invention at all. It may be the most natural output of a brain that is built at a fundamental level to take serpent-like threats very seriously. Then you add the silhouette of a bird of prey, another ancient predator, and the power of a big cat, and you have assembled from the raw material of evolutionary fear of all the things that have killed human beings throughout the distant and deep past, something that looks very much like a dragon. And while I don't think that any of these three theories are inherently bad, I just feel like they're incomplete, and all of them, while maybe they answer one thing, they create 10 more questions. Something I've thought about that I think is a decent theory that doesn't look for the single origin of any of these specific dragons themselves is a theory that looks at what the dragon actually means, or what it stands for, what it's symbolic of, across every culture that created one. And what you find is this: in nearly every ancient religious tradition, the world was understood as having three levels: the underworld below, the surface world of the living, which is the midworld, and the sky world above. And in culture after culture, the dragon is the only creature that doesn't respect that division. It lives underground and deep in the water, it flies through the air, and it walks on the surface of the earth. It combines the features of creatures from every level of existence, serpent, bird, and beast, into a single being that encompasses all three worlds simultaneously. The dragon in this theory represents what the world could have looked like before it was divided, the primordial chaos before there was an above and a below, a living and a dead, an order and a wildness. And mastering or becoming that dragon is an act of creation itself, or an act of divinity itself, which is perhaps why the Chinese king wanted to be seen as the human embodiment of the dragon, because he himself is spiritually awakened and has mastered all three levels of existence. That's why across nearly every culture we've looked at today, power over the dragon equals power over reality itself. Chinese emperors claimed to be its earthly incarnation, Babylonian gods built the world from its corpse, Egyptian priests fought it every single night to keep the sun alive. We don't know why with any certainty almost every ancient civilization on Earth created or imagined dragons. We can follow the fossils, trace the evolutionary anxieties, or point to other large reptiles like the crocodile and the python and say, here perhaps is how this whole mythological creature was created and ancient people were just naive and trying to make sense of their natural world. But I think that the actual explanation is that ancient people were far more intelligent and far more aware of not only their natural world, but the cosmic, spiritual, esoteric world that existed around them, and that the dragon is a culmination and an amalgamation of their natural, spiritual, and cosmological world, and that it is a creature that can master both the lower, mid, and upper worlds, meaning that it's symbolic of mastery of life and death itself. Unfortunately, there are only so many words in the English language that I can use to describe what the dragon truly means. I think if you wanted a better idea of this, you would have to speak to an ancient Teotihuacano, Aztec, or Maya shaman, king, priest, or you'd have to speak to the Emperor of China himself to truly be able to fathom what the meaning of the dragon itself was. But these are lost civilizations we're talking about, and it's why the prevalence of the dragon across the ancient world is one of the greatest, most enduring, and unsolved mysteries of archaeology. I'm Luke Caverns. If you'd like to join me on a tour around ancient Greece later this year in November, click the link somewhere on screen or in the description below, and please like and subscribe for more videos on the lost history of the ancient world.